Thank you, Danielle. Hi, everyone. This is Harriet Dichter, and I want to welcome everyone to our webinar today with Elizabeth Gaines from the Children's Funding Project. Elizabeth has prepared an incredible, rich amount of material to review with everyone, and we'll have an hour of her time. And because we do have a small group, we are planning to have Elizabeth pause every now and then so that you all can ask questions or provide feedback to Elizabeth as we go. And in addition, because our group is small, we also thought it would be a good idea to do intros before I turn things over to Elizabeth. So I think I can see everyone who's on the call with us today. And the first person actually to introduce themselves is Eric, who is actually the co-chair of the ECFC Finance Committee, which is the sponsor of today's learning webinar. So Eric, do you want to say a few words?
Good morning, or excuse me, afternoon. Hi, Eric Cannon with the Buffett Early Childhood Fund. I'm glad everyone could join us today. We've had a chance to meet Elizabeth on a couple of occasions and really enjoyed our interactions. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to share with us today.
Great, thank you, Eric. Helene, I think you're next, and as you may have heard, Elizabeth thinks you might be in the same building. So if you haven't met each other in person, you can do that soon, maybe.
Hello, everyone. This is Helene Stebbins with the Alliance for Early Success. I'm actually in my home office in Arlington, Virginia, but Elizabeth, I'm excited to hear that you're at WeWork, so we will definitely get together at some point soon.
Yeah.
That's great. Mary, I think you're up next. I can see Mary there. Maybe she's muted herself. Okay, let's go on. And then Rena, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, this is Rena Large, and I'm a consultant with the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative.
Okay, did I miss anyone? Okay, I think not. So Elizabeth, I want to turn things over to you then. And again, our big thanks to you for joining because I think the information you have is going to be of high interest to everyone who is on the call.
Great. And because we're a small group, please do feel free to jump in and ask me to expand on something or take it in a different direction. I'm very flexible. So glad to get to talk with you, and this is a topic that has been growing in importance, not only for me, apparently, but in places around the country. And so we are experiencing some growing pains ourselves here at the Children's Funding Project as we kicked off in October. And we've got just a whole lot of folks out across the country that are trying to figure out how to do this work and how to generate revenue at the local level. So I'm going to run through some slides and some examples, and I wanted to first just back up and tell you briefly why I started the Children's Funding Project. So, at the Forum for Youth Investment, where I was for 13 years, we spent a lot of our time focused with state and local policymakers, helping them think about how to better coordinate and better align the work that they were doing cradle to career for children and youth. And that involved a lot of coordinating the people. And so I worked with a lot of governors' children's cabinets and now increasingly mayors' children's cabinets to try to help them coordinate all those different siloed systems and sectors that focus on children's issues. We, of course, saw over the last however many years a real focus on better sharing of data across those different systems and sectors and using that data to drive decisions. What I kept feeling like was missing was a focus on the money and really understanding how to better coordinate and align the money, but also to just be at the table when decisions about money were happening and be at the table for kids, moving from the kid table to the grown-up table, if you will. And so the Children's Funding Project was really something that grew out of my sense that there was this missing element for our field. And I have a whole bunch of reasons that I could go into if anybody was curious why I think it is that our field has been avoiding the topic of money in certain ways. But a lot of what I've been doing in the past 2 months, and I will just say I've been in 12 different communities in October and November, and it's the same kind of thing. There's almost a bit of therapy that has to go on among the folks in the child and youth field to get them to a place where they feel like they can get a big picture handle on the money that is flowing into their communities to support the things they know work, and how to get them moving to free up more of that money to support those things. So the Children's Funding Project is really about these 4 areas of pulling some policy levers around finding the money, so understanding what money flows into the community, aligning the money once you've found it so that you can really be doing your due diligence and making sure that you're spending the money in efficient and effective ways, and that the resources are getting to the right kids at the right time. Generating money is the big piece that we're trying to go hard on right now, because we think there's really a window of opportunity, and that's generating new revenue, whether it's tax revenue or otherwise, but really finding some ways to fill some of the gaps that we identify as we do define and align work. And then evaluate is obviously important, because if we can't point to the return that we're getting for the investments that we're making, we're not going to be able to continue to make those investments. So really helping people to understand these levers, and then making sure that we are, as fast as we can, documenting and showcasing places that are using them in practical ways and what they are doing and how it's working and how it's helping. And then we're doing a lot of coaching and a lot of just trying to make tools to make it easier for people to do this work, because we understand that if your job is to run a large child care center and participate in your local collective impact partnership, and it's yet another thing to try to also then be deep in these budget issues and making sense of them. So as many tools as we can give to folks to use, the better. And then, really just trying to build some momentum for a more proactive approach. And Eric, I see you've raised your hand. Great.
I did raise my hand.
Nobody ever raises their hand on a webinar.
I thought I raised my hand. I used this neat tool here to raise my hand.
Yeah.
So let's go back. You said that you had some thoughts about what you don't want to talk about in these communities. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, and I come from direct service. I ran youth programs for a long time. I was a state advocate, sort of beating my head against the wall in my home state of Missouri, trying to, at that time, free up tobacco settlement dollars for child and youth development, fighting the big dogs, the research institutions and the science, the biotech people and all those folks, trying to make sure kids got some of that money. And I think that we internalized the messages people were giving us. Oh, now's not the right time. Oh, it's a bad economy. Oh, you guys, don't know, whether you're getting 100%, outcomes for the money that you're spending. All of these messages that we were sort of given as a field, I think people have really taken them to heart, partly because they're caseworkers and social workers and people that, don't want to do confrontation necessarily. And so I think there's just a lot for us to do personally as adults in this field to get okay with demanding and really talking about the investment that's necessary to make the kind of communities that we want to have. So I think that there's a little bit of like getting past our adult oh, but this could happen or this could go wrong or somebody might not like me kind of thing. I know that sounds sort of touchy-feely, but I really think that's a lot of what's going on. Do you have ideas? I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious if you.
I think there's truth to what you say. I also don't think that people have the right information to be able to make some of the arguments that they would like to in that regard. I don't think that's always happening, and it may not be happening in a way that's easily portrayed. It can be complex.
Well, No, and that's really true. And I should have said that too, that when I did my very first fiscal map in Missouri back in, I don't know, 2000, I don't know, 2, 3, something like that. The reason I did it is because we were trying to get those tobacco settlement dollars to go to child and youth development, and legislators would say to me, well, what are we currently spending on child and youth development? And I'd say, I have no idea, because the money is spread all over all of these different departments, and nobody's ever sort of stepped back to say, what is enterprise-wide in the whole state, what are we spending on these things? And so that was, for me, one of my early lessons was, okay, if we're going to be making a case for more money, we better know how much money we're currently spending.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
So then what I thought I'd do today is just dive into Find and Align a little bit, just to give you a flavor of some of the work that we're helping people to do, but then really to focus on Generate, because as I said, there is this window, and we're seeing a lot of interesting traction around that. So I'm going to hop ahead and give you a sense of a couple of places. And Rena, was it you that was saying you're in Montgomery County? Somebody on the phone is in Montgomery County. I think it was.
It was actually Danielle. It's Danielle.
Oh, that was Danielle. Okay. So Montgomery County, probably some of you know this group, the Montgomery Moving Forward Collective Impact Partnership, asked us to come in because they were one of those communities that said, okay, we've got a really robust early childhood collective impact partnership going, but what we need to do is do our due diligence to say, here's what we're spending in this county. We know there's a lot of money going into early childhood in this county, but we don't exactly have a big picture view on it. And are there things that we could be doing to better align that money? So this is just some of we're literally finishing this project right now, so some of these are not to be shared necessarily. But this is to give you a taste of, we help them to think about in 3 categories what the investments and by whom are in childcare and pre-K, what the investments are in family supports and healthy development, and what the investments are in system building. And this gives you a little bit of a feel of who the different payors in terms of levels of government or the private sector or parents. And you'll notice something, if you look at these closely, you'll notice the huge parent figure in category 1, right? That parents are paying the lion's share. And so one of the things that they wanted us to do was help them with a visual that would say, okay, we see how much parents are contributing in this county to this early childhood ecosystem, and is this the right picture? Is this what we want our county to offer to its citizens? And so now they can have some conversation about what does that mean, what does that look like, and so that was one of the things that we did with them. And then the other thing that's still too hot off the presses to share in any kind of detail here is they wanted recommendations for how they could better align the resources that they have. So we broke those into 4 buckets for them based on their data, and that was, ways they could spend existing dollars in the system differently, new strategies to bring money into the system, and then ways that they really need to do some work to level the playing field between the pre-K and the child care system, and then some things around improving family supports and connections. So there's some, alignment issues, some waivers, some new funding to reach out about. There's a few different kinds of things that we help them to think about. So then switching to another place that wanted to do some fiscal mapping, and this is kind of to give you a taste of these fiscal maps. You've seen one and you've only just, seen one. Each place is coming up with very different ways to tackle this. And some of you will have seen this picture because I've been using it quite a bit, but Buncombe County, which is the Asheville area in North Carolina, they wanted to, for a very targeted reason, start to make the case around new dollars for pre-K in their county. And so we helped them to visualize and think about, okay, here are all of the funding streams that come into our county to support slots for pre-K. The 812 are really, parents paying. The 2,700 are paid for by those public dollars. And then if we had $19 million more, 1,700 more kids could gain access to pre-K, and that 1,700 was based off of, okay, we assume about this many kids would participate if given the option that aren't participating now. So now they have this picture that they can use to say, here's the gap we need to fill. And they've actually been successful. So they went to their county commission and have gotten, I want to say, $3 million just in this first year since they started talking about this number, and are moving forward, to try to put something on the ballot as well. And hopefully they'll have success. But so just being able to articulate what amount you're going for is an important piece of the puzzle. So then this is another example. This was in King County, Washington, the Seattle area, where we did some work to help them think about, and in their case it was a very broad youth action plan for the county. And so they wanted to understand their county investments. Now this one's just their county dollars, but they wanted to understand where the bulk of the county dollars were going, into what age groups, into what outcome areas. And so they, have this picture then that they said, okay, and the county executive was like, well, we don't want to be a county that just, and I should say the healthy and safe are sort of misnomers, because really what that is juvenile justice, child welfare, some really deep end things. And so, the county executive said, we want to do early intervention and prevention with the youngest kids. We want to be a county that's really investing in those things. And so they were able to then go and put a question on the ballot to raise property tax, and now are generating $65 million to start to round out that picture and start to have a much more complete set of program and service offerings across the ages and across the outcome areas in King County. So that was pretty exciting to see that one come to fruition. Another place that I would just point you to is the city and county of Denver, where the mayor's office has put a children's cabinet in place some years ago, I want to say 2012, I think. And essentially one of the things that we helped them to do is to think about, okay, you've got all of these different agencies of city and county government that sit on this children's cabinet. Wouldn't it be good, in the spirit of coordinating your people, your data, your money, wouldn't it be good if you could really have an interactive way to look at all of your budgets together and make better sense of them and sort and sift? This is just one page of their interactive fiscal map that they've put together for the city, and it's very user-friendly and searchable. If you actually wanted to check it out when you're off the webinar, I would encourage you to I think you can Google Denver Children's Cabinet data, and you will get to the page with a bunch of really great tabs that you can go to and search around and see how they're really trying to be intentional about not only the collection of data on kids, which I'll tell you about in a second, that's this page, but the data on what they're investing as leaders in their citywide investments. So then they also paired their budget information with information on how kids are doing neighborhood by neighborhood. And so they have, a really great way of tracking by each neighborhood a whole host of outcomes and how kids are doing. And now they can look and see what it is that they're investing in those neighborhoods and do a little bit of more intentional planning around where they need to invest their dollars. So I always point to Denver as sort of the most sophisticated as a institution, of government in how they're doing this work. So those are sort of the find and align aspects, like that early stuff that we try to encourage people to do. One thing I'm telling people though right now is don't feel like you have to get all of your find and align ducks in a row before you start to think about how to generate new revenue, because these things don't happen in a linear way, and we're in a window right now where there's, I think, some real public willingness to do some things at the local level that they don't always have the willingness to do. So when I talk to folks about Generate, I usually say, okay, we've got this sort of common stuff on the left-hand side. People are used to thinking about approaching each of these types of funders to support the work that they're doing. we're trying at the Children's Funding Project to think about some of these other innovative ways of financing some things. So I'm not going to go into all of these. I was just going to touch on the local public dedicated funding streams, but if folks have good examples or are curious, we can always come back with more information about some of these other types. I mean, I'm actually getting myself more and more curious about, are there ways to do really strong community benefit agreements as developers are coming into communities and really being at the table up front as coalitions of folks that care about kids. Because I think that's another piece that we've been missing is getting into those conversations before they happen, instead of sort of retroactively going and asking, oh, could we please? Instead saying, if you're going to come here, this is the agreement, that has to be in place. So that's another. Yeah.
Are you seeing? Can you cite a couple of places where that's actually happening? My eye went to that too. I recently had a conversation with someone affiliated with our foundations who had just come out of the housing department in Omaha and is going to be working on some stuff for the Sherwood Foundation, but she had talked about some of that, these ideas around community benefit. And then also, which is maybe not a question, but more of a comment, right? I mean, and some of us sort of are these opportunity zones that have been identified. And, but as far as at this moment in time, it still seems like the rules are still evolving, and there's some questions around, certain definitions of what constitutes a business. But anyway, I'm just curious if you had samples or new communities that have done it well.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a great bevy of information on that, just as much as I do on some of these other things. But it's something that I'm really wanting to dig into more. And I know on the West Coast they've been pretty good about this. In San Francisco, they've been doing some things. There's the notion of developer impact fees, but this is slightly different. This is sort of as the new stadium is going to, is being negotiated, and the agreements there, or as, hospitals start, you can do all kinds of agreements if you've got the policymakers, primed up front to really hold the line for some things that they want to see in their community. I mean, take the, Amazon HQ2 thing. That was a real opportunity for a community to say, here's what we need if you're going to come here. Now, I know that this is what happens, right? We always put it in this scarcity mode of like, oh, please come here. But it could be that some of these businesses actually want to go to a place that is thinking about that stuff, right? And Helene, I see you've raised your hand, so jump in if you have something you want to add here.
So actually, it's not adding on. So if you want to finish that thought, it'll take us.
Yeah. So again, I don't have good solid examples to point you to. San Francisco's got some. I'd have to look them up again. I know Miami was looking to do something in a neighborhood there that they were going to be building a new stadium, but there's examples. We just need to dig them up and get them written up. It's on my list, on my to-do list. Oh, Harriet has a small stadium example from Philly.
Yeah, it's really old. This reminded me, it was so long ago I'd forgotten about it. But we did get a new stadium, and there was, in the end, I mean, it was very compromised, basically, because it was a small stream, not a lot of money, basically, and it has a weird allocation process. I think we still are getting money from it every year, but I think it's actually interesting because in reflecting on it, it has some of these issues, Elizabeth, that you were raising in terms of positioning the issue and getting the community conversation right. And at the time, and this would have been almost 20 years ago now when this happened, people saw it as the child advocacy community being a pest, basically.
Right.
It did result in some dollars basically going into what I think were maybe middle school, high school services for kids. But, so anyhow, I just wanted to share that I did remember that prior to the more effective soda tax that we now have, it's actually generating more real money, we had this other thing that didn't quite work out as had been hoped.
Yeah, yeah, and with any of these, it's like if you don't stay on it, if you don't sort of continue to be a pest, it can go away, right? So I think there was an example in Boston of something related to a new development, and it was supposed to be that a portion of money was going to go each year to host big events for youth, and it was actually some young people. I'll have to find this story and send it around to you all, but it was some young people that found this. They were in like a policy class or something. They were high school students, and they found this provision, and they went back to the city council, and then the city council went to the developer or the corporation, and they now have to pay back money for, and it was like millions of dollars at this point because it's been going on for years. They hadn't been paying it. So there's like little things like that that are a victory for. But Helene, did you want to say something?
I was just going to ask a question about the level of government here, and feel free to put me on hold if you're going to get to this later. But it seems like a lot of your examples are local, and I'm curious if that's because that's your client base, or if that's where kind of the rubber hits the road. And so if we're thinking about financing and where we have ability to kind of make a difference, is the local level where there's more opportunity?
So I think so. Right now, I spent the last dozen years at the forum really focused on the state level, and my previous advocacy work was at the state level before that. And so I'm not a stranger to working the state process, but I think that there is something going on in this country that is different at the local level, and that especially when it comes to asking voters to raise taxes on themselves. Which is what I'm about to hop into. I really feel like this new localism is the way to go, and people are willing to pay taxes when they know it's going to go to their community. And so I just think we have a particular window, and I also think states are tough with the way that our states are lined up right now. It's really tough to do. Now, there are a number of places, and I'll show you. I have one slide that has some state examples on it, and I can hop there in a second. So this just is as a reminder before I hop to that state slide that, I tell people this all the time. I don't know how much you all as funders tell people this, but I'm like, remember that philanthropy is a small slice of, and this is just federal dollars, right? This is just looking nationally at federal dollars versus philanthropy dollars. This doesn't include state and local dollars, or it's a drop in the bucket compared to what these public dollars are. Yet people spend all of their time and energy chasing philanthropy dollars. So I don't know if that's good or bad to tell you all that this is what people are doing, but I'm pretty sure you already know it. So that is just a reminder that I am encouraging the field not to leave public dollars untapped and not to go after more public dollars, because I think that that's just what we're going to have to do to scale. So, but from a state funding mechanisms perspective, and I'm happy to share this report that's going to be coming out with you all. We did something in partnership with the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. I'm sure you guys all know them because they're really good and they're all over the place. But they wanted us to do some research on state and local dedicated revenue for early childhood, and so we looked into all of these state examples. I'm sure many of them you know of. And Eric, now I'm embarrassed. Did I get the abbreviation for Nebraska right?
That is correct.
Oh, good, because I had it as NB, and then I was like, no, that's wrong.
It is NE.
Great. So there are some examples, but I think more of these examples are older, honestly. I haven't seen, does anybody know of any in the last couple of years at the state level?
What's going on?
So we'll come back to that. If anyone thinks of any, yell it out. So then, just as we talk about local, back at this new localism thing, this is what we've been really trying to drum up some support around, because I think that it is an untapped strategy that has a lot of potential. So when I say public local dedicated funding stream, that's what we're talking about. Is when we say dedicated, is really a special pot of money that can only be spent on services to children, youth, and families, and sometimes even more specific than that, usually more specific than that. And that it is, year after year. Sometimes there will be a sunset. Some of these places have a sunset, but it's at least 6 years. And another thing I will say is that these places on the map that have done it and that have had to go for reauthorization, it's amazing. The 4 sites in Florida that have had to go for reauthorization have won with between 76 and 82% of the votes. So 76 to 82% of Florida voters are saying, yes, continue to property tax us for the Children's Services Fund. Everybody let that sink in. And in Missouri, my home state, there are 10 counties that have done this, and they've done a sales tax increase for children's mental health. So that's pretty remarkable, too, when you think about Missouri and what goes on there. So just to zoom in, because I know all of you are part of the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative, I thought we could share a couple of examples from some places that are focused pretty solely on early childhood, and, well, with the exception of the special taxing districts in Broward and Palm Beach, because those are broader, but they do focus on early childhood as well. So, folks are using lots of different mechanisms, sales, property. The pilot recapture, have folks heard about the Memphis example? I think this is pretty interesting. And actually, this one is not a voter-initiated fund, as well as the Philly soda tax. That one is not voter-initiated either, but it's their local government that did it. So pilot is pay in lieu of taxes. So this is folks who were getting a tax break that was set to expire, and instead of letting it expire, businesses letting their tax break expire, the dollars will go direct into a pot to fill some pre-K slots in Memphis. So it's a pretty good way to make something not feel painful and to recapture that money for a good purpose and set it aside and protect it. I'm a huge fan of what Mayor Kenney did, Harriet, in Philadelphia, and he's been taking a lot of slack for a lot of people. And I think that, he stood pretty strong against the beverage industry in their attempt to bring that down. And I told him, like, you took one for the team, and I feel like that, it opens some stuff up for other parts of the country to do something like what he did. One thing to worry about, though, is that states are starting to do a lot of preemption, and so a lot of these, that's why this window of opportunity, because I think a lot of doors are going to close because states are going to recognize that localities are getting a lot of power to be able to do this kind of stuff. So that's a worry, is that there will be, closing, or there's already limited ways that localities can raise revenue, and they will close even further over the next number of years.
So Elizabeth, let me just jump in here because, as Elizabeth probably knows, it's a very live thing in Pennsylvania. I mean, the industry is well funded, and in addition to all the fighting locally to get it passed, that there have been serious preemption efforts at the state level. So I just wanted to underscore that. It's, Elizabeth, you're right to say it's like an ongoing defense. It was an ongoing offense to get it, and it's ongoing defense to keep it, although the Supreme Court, there was also litigation, and that was successfully won or defended. The city did that. But I just wanted to underscore that issue. This is a really heavy political lift, and and I think that's true around the country. I think the advocates who work on this actually spend a lot of time with each other across the states on the preemption issues, since it's cropping up everywhere.
Yeah, not just in funding, right? They're preempting all kinds of things at the state level. So I'll fly through these examples, and if anybody wants me to stop on a particular one, just shout it out. But you probably all know about the Denver preschool program. That was one of the early ones that passed and then also got reauthorized and continues to be a growing fund and an opportunity for a mixed delivery system to be supported in Denver for pre-K. Aspen and Pitkin County in Colorado is another spot that I think has done a really good job of going, okay, we are a very expensive place to live. If we're going to really cover the kids that need it, we've got to get up to 500% of the federal poverty level, which, as you all know, that's not something you can typically do with most grants that are out there. And so they were able to generate new revenue there to bring that level up to 500%. So that was big for them. I already mentioned Memphis, where they were really able to do that pilot recapture, and then they also took 1 cent of their existing property tax and moved it to this issue. Kent County, I'm super excited about because they came and got the inspiration for doing some of this to an early 2015, well, it was actually December 2015 training that I did for cities and counties from around the country, and Anne Marie Valdez, who runs the First Steps Kent, was able to really do a great job of coordinating this coalition of funders and others in the community, and they are now, they voted in November to pass the Ready by 5, and it's a small amount of money, but it was a good way, and they really outlined specifically where the money would go. And now they've got a foot in the door, and I think that they can probably go back in a year or two and increase it to serve more kids if they can be successful with how they implement. So that one's exciting.
Do you have any information around how popular these were, or so passed, but did they just barely pass? Did they, were they landslide? And how many people were actually, it's not unusual for, an election, if you had 30% turnout, you feel, so 30% of the people are deciding something that's happening. And I don't know if you have some thoughts around, is there a sort of a tipping point in terms of turnout that mattered?
Yeah, I don't know on the turnout front, but they won with, I want to say 57% of the vote. So that's a pretty good, that's a pretty good number. I was on November 5th and 6th in Allegheny County, the Pittsburgh area, where we had the Allegheny Children's Fund on the ballot. It lost 49 to 51. But what I say to them, I'm like, for some of those places that are on the map that I showed you, it took them 3 times to win.
Right. Right.
But and I said, in Allegheny County, that 49% of the people that turned out to vote wanted to do this. That's a big deal, So it's not like they lost. It's just a building that they need to do. So the other thing I would say is this is where we have to kind of get a little more savvy too, not only about knowing where the money is, but also in political campaigns. And I'm going to say a few things about that in just a second. But the notion that you got to get in there and you got to use voter modeling and you got to turn the people out that are going to support something, and you got to know how to do that. And there's voter analytics, and we have a guy that does that with us, and he's trying to help people learn how you turn out the exact right people. In Jackson County in November 2016, that was during the Trump election, they voted to support the Children's Fund in that Kansas City area. And what he did at the very last moment is he looked at his numbers and did some last-minute polling and saw that what they needed to do was turn out at least 4,000 evangelical white women in the suburbs to vote because they were supporting it. And so they did some really clear modeling work, and they got 10,000 white evangelical women in the suburbs to turn out, and they won by, I want to say, something like 56% there, too. So, we just have to play the game a little bit better. And here, while the rest of you are sitting there feeling scared about the fact that I'm talking about, about this on a call with foundations, I want to quickly get to the slides where we tell you what you can and can't do in this regard. And I'm sure some of you have looked into this already. But my example that I always like to give is in Broward County, the Fort Lauderdale area. when the Children's Services Council had to go back on the ballot because a state legislator decided that all of the children's services funds in Florida would need to go back to the voters because he didn't think that the voters really supported them. They were concerned because they're a quasi-governmental entity that was created, and they didn't think that they could do a whole lot to really promote themselves on this ballot issue. And so the Community Foundation of Broward County really stepped in and said, we can support this, and we're going to put our resources behind it, because otherwise the $65 million a year that the Children's Services Fund brings in would go away, and then the Community Foundation would be left holding the bag, from just a perspective of making a good, smart investment. it made sense for them. And so they talk about, in their own words, they would say, these things down the left-hand side were things they would expect would have happened. But the things on the right-hand side are things that they really thought, wow, this is, new stuff that we wouldn't have even expected would have happened. So, they've really deepened their relationships with the for-profit sector. They have, really stepped in as a community leader. There's all kinds of things like that are going on there now because of their involvement in this thing. And one of the things that they had to do was go in and change their bylaws so that they could participate in a deeper way. And I recognize that they're a community foundation, and many of you on the phone are private foundations, and there are different rules. But I'm going to point you to some resources in a second that might help with that. So then, just in terms of thinking about the readiness for this kind of measure. And I see Margaret Brodkin has joined. I don't know, Margaret, if you're on mute or if you can talk, but feel free to jump in and say something if you have an idea that you want to share. But so in terms of readiness, because Margaret, by the way, is the person who has done a ton of this work out in California, who I am standing on her shoulders when I do this work. So thanks, Margaret. So the question about readiness really, comes down to sort of triangulating in on three things: understanding what the will of the public is in a particular place, what they want, really understanding not only what revenue options are available in your particular community context, but also what the mechanisms for getting that passed, whether it's a citizen initiative, petition drive, or it's getting the county to put it on the ballot, et cetera. But also understanding the need of kids and understanding what the revenue gaps are that you're trying to fill. And then another big piece is just who in your community is motivated and energized and going to roll up their sleeves and work on this. And that's sort of how you can sort of hone in on what the ballot measure itself would be. And then these steps down the side, really all of these steps except for step number 4 are things that a private foundation can be pretty deeply involved in. So the things up front around the research, the readying of a diverse coalition of people, the polling and understanding the views of the public, conducting the campaign, you have to step out, and then establishing the funding stream is certainly a way that a role that foundations can help with in terms of just putting the right infrastructure in place to do this. And the types of funding mechanisms that we're seeing are things like this. And this is, Margaret, from the thing that we worked on with you to sort of say, okay, there's a lot of different ideas out there, many of which have been tried, and some of them still need to get tried, but I think there's a lot of new and growing ideas with the new gig economy. I think there's all kinds of new things that we could be thinking about, so we shouldn't limit ourselves to what has been taxed before. We need to think about what is going to be taxed into the future. And then this one too is this notion that, we've got a group of I think it needs to be a policymaker at the local level, a funder at the local level, and some sort of intermediary at the local level initially that come together to do this work. And then you're going to end up with a big group of people towards the end that need to work on this together. So just in terms of foundations, I wanted to make sure to be clear. So community foundations can do a whole lot in this space. But most of you, I think, are private foundations, and so there's a few things you cannot do. One is directly support or oppose a ballot measure. Another is earmark grants to support or oppose ballot measures. But you can discuss the subject of the measure before it is actually a measure. You can express your view regarding a measure. If there is a petition drive or something like that, and it begins to circulate, you cannot, and then it's actually considered specific legislation, you cannot express a view. But up until that point, you have a lot of room to do a lot of things. And then there's this notion of, so I've got one foundation that's made a grant to us to work in their community, and it is a general support grant. So that means that we are, as a nonprofit organization, doing work on a ballot measure, and that is our druthers. It is because it's a general support grant. It doesn't affect the foundation's lobbying pool. So I would say if you were going to support somebody in your community in doing this, it would be smart to do a general grant. So yeah, these are just some additional rules around that, and how you want to think about, what kind of communications you can support, and what kind of research you can support, and what kind of public education you want to do, and there's really quite a bit of things that foundations can be involved in. Oh, and I'm seeing Helene has a question here. Did you collect any data on what it costs to run a ballot initiative? This requires C4 funding, but our contacts tell us they are very expensive, millions of dollars. So they don't have to be. There are many different varietals, I think, that have popped up, and I would say on the cheap side would be in Florida, those examples. I don't believe they've spent a whole lot of money. On the expensive side, I think what we saw in Allegheny County and what we saw in Kent County were they spent a little bit more money. They wanted to be safe. I don't know, Margaret, if you're on mute or not, but if you want to weigh in from the West Coast side on what you think it's costing folks, we generally tell people to think about like 75 cents per population. So if you're, it depends on the size of your city, how many people you need to reach and all of that, but we tell people to think about it with that rough gauge in mind, 75 cents per whatever your, city or county's population is.
Can you hear me, Elizabeth?
Yes.
It's Margaret. Hi. Hi, everyone. Yeah, the cost of a campaign is a major issue for people to consider. And of course, it depends, as Elizabeth said, on the size of the community. A small community, it can cost, $100,000. I was just in LA. They're talking about millions and millions of dollars to do a campaign in LA. And it partly depends on what the voter threshold is needed. If you need a 2/3 vote, then it costs a lot more. It also depends on whether you have opposition. So if there's opposition, it costs a lot more. The people who really can spell it out, since it varies so much, are political consultants in your community who can tell you what an average ballot measure costs.
Yeah, that's totally true. So that's sort of on ballot measures, and I will say, maybe I should pause there because that was a whole lot of information before we jump to the next couple of slides and then we wrap up. Did folks have any thoughts or questions, or have you been toying with the idea of supporting these kinds of things in particular communities?
This is Helene. I'll just pipe in. We did a series of conference calls with our state partners on behalf of a funder who was interested in doing this. And it just varies tremendously. Some states cannot do it, right? It's not legally allowed. I don't know if that varies within a state at the local level, but whether or not you can even run it, you have to first check whether it's legal in your state. then again, there's this just huge variation in what it costs, and that it is a significant upfront investment with funds that tend to be very restricted, right? They have to, you can't use generally nonprofit funds for it.
Right. So one of the things that I have started to do with places, because a lot of folks don't even yet have a sense. I was on the phone with a foundation yesterday, and they've hired us for their city and county, it's a city-county, to do what we're calling a revenue options memo. And we have an economist who is working with us, who's done these and used to be the state economist in Michigan. And we've got a chart of all 50 states. We've looked at all of the constitutions. We still don't have a clue in most places exactly, what they can and can't do. And so it does require some of this research. So when I talked about, what does readiness look like, it partly looks like, doing some of that research and getting some of those things written down so that people have confidence that they're going in the right direction. So, a revenue options memo is going to tell you what taxes are even possible at the city and county level, what the mechanism for getting those passed is, what the threshold is, what it would likely generate in terms of an amount, so that people have, some grounding in, okay, here are our options. It feels like a really good way for foundations to support some of these efforts in some of these communities. So, other thoughts or questions? While we're on that, I'm just going to jump to this is a slide too, Margaret, that comes from your inspiration here about the benefits really being worth it. That, what you're able to do if you can get something like this going is do some of those things to expand services and to scale, and that's something that's always a challenge. To have the creativity and the flexibility built in to support a mixed delivery system because it's locally designed, and some of those things that we would love to be able to do, but because our hands are tied with federal funds or state funds or what have you, we can't do. And then the system building and the infrastructure support that it can provide is really big. None of these funds that I pointed to earlier have a very large infrastructure line item, but they all have somewhere between 5 and 10%, and that is enough to really do the capacity building and the evaluation, and really hold the money, keep the money accountable for outcomes. And then the other big piece is around constituency building, and it's like the Allegheny County example that I was giving, where they have now a big constituency of people that were actually out knocking on doors for kids, and they've got a kids, what's the word I'm looking for? A kids, not a lobby, but they've got a group of people that are committed to fighting for kids in their local government. So I think there's a lot of really good benefits to doing it. This is my last slide, and I will just say, I think there's some activities that would be interesting to see some national foundations, some local foundations start to get more involved in, and as I said, the revenue options is a big piece that folks need. The fiscal map is certainly a piece, and I think when I say fiscal map, I'm talking about like that quick and dirty example, like the Buncombe County one that I showed. Materials to help people make the case, doing some sort of an initial baseline poll so you have a sense of where the public stands on issues, some of the initial coalition building activities, and then public education on the issue. These all feel like really good things for the foundation community to get in on. And then one of the things, and Margaret, I'm glad you're on the phone, because one of the things that she and I were talking about the other day was, are there some partners that would be, interested in supporting some sort of a convening of some of the communities that are really trying to go for this in 2018 and 2020. I'm sorry, in 2020 and 2022, because these folks need to hear from others and learn some of those best practices that they're doing. They need a chance to meet with some of the experts that we could convene that could help them shape their plans. I just think that in terms of the movement building, getting some of these places that are really gearing up to go for it together would be a powerful thing. So that is my last my last comment to all of you, and happy to talk about any of the other things in more detail.
Hey,
thank you,
Helene,
Elizabeth. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Just real quick, yeah, Helene, if you're still on, this idea that states are preemptively putting, rules or laws in place that are restricting local communities from doing all kinds of things. I mean, everything from property taxes to kind of stuff we talked about with soda taxes and so forth. Are you seeing at the state level that the advocates that are supporting children and families, are they aware of those? How are they engaging? Are they able to be part of sort of stating and fighting that stuff off?
Yeah, so like a perfect example is North Carolina. So we, I'm sure many of you are aware of some of the good early childhood work that's been going on in North Carolina. They have the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation, which isn't really a foundation, but is a really great convener, put together this local financing toolkit. They also had at the same time a state Blue Ribbon Commission that was tasked with thinking about financing early childhood. Well, both of these things are happening. Communities are getting trained in how they can be more engaged in financing things locally, and the pressure is on at the state level for them to come up with a solution for financing early childhood. And so there's a little bit of a pressure cooker, I think, going on in North Carolina where these counties are starting to get together and they're starting to say, wait a minute, one, you're telling us this is an important value that the state has, but you're not putting any new money into it, and you're keeping us from putting money into it.
Right.
Something's got to give here, So I think there's a little bit of that going on in other places where people are thinking about, is there, something like state enabling legislation that would make it possible for communities to determine their own destiny in some ways, and so we're trying to help places, like I'm looking in places like Michigan, at what state enabling legislation might look like so that, more counties can do. It's no miracle that Missouri and Florida have so many of these. It's because each of the states has state enabling legislation that's allowed them to go to the voters locally and do it.
Eric, Helene had to jump off, so I think that we can't hear her answer as to what she would say, within the alliance states, how prepared people are, but I can follow up with her if you want.
Yeah, I heard. Maybe you guys couldn't hear.
Oh, that was Elizabeth.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was Helene. Okay, great.
No, that was Elizabeth talking.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So this is Harriet again, and we're actually just at our ending time. But before we close out, I just want to make sure that if anyone has any other questions for Elizabeth before we end for the day.
Will we get the slides?
Well, Elizabeth, are you comfortable with me distributing them?
Yeah.
Okay,
Totally.
So the answer is yes, Eric, because the slides,
Great.
Elizabeth, are phenomenal. As anyone who's looked at them. They're really detailed and really fantastic. So let me close us all out then, because Elizabeth, really want to thank you for spending the time. This is really an impressive body of work that you have here, and for sharing all this information and perspective. And I will make sure that everybody who was on the call gets the slides. So thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, everyone, for joining in.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle.